Thank you, everyone. Now, this final session is about the ship owners and financiers. And for the first panel, we've got a finance panel where they're talking about their attitude towards risk and responsibility in this market, which is critical. And it's a great pleasure to introduce the speakers. And if we could ask them to come up, we have Stefan Vetter from KfW IPEX Bank, Kunatoli Skottvedt from DNB Bank, and Rajbir Talwar from FPGAIM Capital, which is a new alternative investment house. Thank you. And let me sit down here. Good. Gentlemen, first of all, I wanted just to ask you, actually, let's go through the simple stuff. If you could just map out for us briefly your engagement with the ship recycling business, because you all come from institutions with a very different approach to this, and obviously consequently that colours your attitude towards the risks and responsibilities of your clients and others around. So if I could, Stefan, where does ship recycling touch your business?
Thank you, Julian. I mean, for us, it started very much in 2018. Yeah. So as a banks, we always took sustainability important, in ship finance. And for example, in 2012, we started to ask our clients in a new ship finance for the EEDI. So and the clients are so, "Hi, why do you ask for it?" Yeah. So that was kind of new. And then I think we will talk about the role of banks also in ship recycling. And we really have to say that NGOs played an important role. Yeah, to report on dirty scrapping, to show the pictures, and then of course the press also took it up, like TradeWinds reported on it, and then it was also becoming for us an important topic because we realized, okay, we have to contribute to make shipping and ship recycling more sustainable, and then we were really glad that some other banks from Europe have started an initiative, the RSIS initiative, and we joined that in 2018, and since then we try with every loan agreement we're negotiating with ship owners to bring in this responsible ship recycling standards, undertakings that at least the ship owner needs to fulfill Hong Kong Convention or EU regulation when there's the ship recycling at the end of the life cycle of the ship.
And of course, for the institutions, and it goes for customers of ship owners as well, the shippers, there's a reputational risk for them to be associated,
absolutely,
of course, which is critical. Kunatola, could I ask you to just map out how it touches you?
It's quite similar story, actually. Our sustainability has been important, etc., but our focus and discussions around sustainability in the bank intensified around 2017. We had the Paris Agreement coming out, shipping not being part of it, so there's more and more questions about shipping. You had other shipping regulations coming on SOx, on ballast water treatment and all that, and there was increasing discussions around recycling. So when credit to the three Dutch banks, ABN, ING and NIBC, who then launched responsible ship recycling standards. Well, there's plenty of documents called responsible ship recycling standard. This is the one for banks. They launched it at North Shipping in 2017, and we joined that launch actually because we had been in dialogue with them for a year almost. So we started doing this, integrating in loan agreements, moving from kind of, it says on a best efforts basis, include clauses in loan agreements and engage clients, etc. We made it more and more mandatory. So as of today, it's no longer best efforts. We require it actually. So that's
how often these days are your clients actually scrapping ships?
Well, that's the thing. To speak for ourselves, but I think it's very much the same for a lot of other similar European ship finance banks, that we tend to focus on top tier names, mainly with normally younger fleets. Not always. We also have some more industry shipping companies who tend to hold on to their ship for a long time. But it's but it's not really not that often. But yes, we did have some cases that ended up on the front pages. Yes, we were laid out on the front page of your sister publication, Dagens Næringsliv, the kind of Financial Times of Norway. and we had to stand up for it. And that was after we had joined the RSRS. So, you know, so it's both kind of reputational issue, but also really, you know, this is something that the shipping industry needs to engage in, on all the stakeholders in the shipping industry. We cannot accept this. You know, we need to assume responsibility, all of us.
Thanks for that. Rudby, you used to work for one of those banks that helped set up the Responsible Ship Recycling Standards Initiative, but now you've struck out on your own with a new venture. How's this issue touching you in the new business?
Yeah, good question. So thankfully I'm not on my own. It's 23 others of us. But I was indeed colleagues with the other two gentlemen when I was at ABN AMRO. And I know the bank at that time and probably continues to take this as a very serious issue, maybe even before climate became sexy. So I think that this has been on the agenda of the banks for some time, and as Knut and Stefan know much better, because I've been out of banking as a space, and I'll come to what I'm doing about a year and a half, but I think it's only getting more and more at the front page of some of these credit/risk discussions in institutions, but I'll let them explain. So far as I'm concerned, I work with FPG AIM Capital. FPG AIM, our parent, is 20 ex-bankers, lawyers came together to channel predominantly Japanese capital into the industry. They've arranged financing for about $18 billion of capital into the industry. Together, me and two others have set up the asset management arm, and we're in the process of launching various funds to be able to cover the maritime industry. And where does ship recycling touch us is, needless to say, our focus on our first fund is on financing ships with energy efficiency improvement. But if you see the same vein and you go down to try to create products around ships and impact, that's where I think we can play a role. Plus, our client set is probably going to be slightly different from the bank's client set, because we have inherently a higher cost of capital. So we cannot go after, if we would love to, but cannot the bigger set. But that puts us in a position, I think, to work with smaller ship owners, and how can we then bring industry forward. So one way we're going to do that as well is we have a partnership, a budding partnership with an institution by the name of Calm Ocean. They're a leading green ship recycling advisory. So that's one touch point in how we want to do it. And maybe we can build products together, financial products.
That's interesting, because it puts you in this important market of the older ships, the ones that are probably more likely to go to scrapping in the future. In the context of obviously the higher price of the capital you may be offering, how are you able to assess the relative higher risk of the dangers of the reputational damage from badly handled ship recycling projects? Yeah. So it's a very good question. I think key part of what we're doing is impact, and it's primarily focused on climate impact. But the more the investor set we speak to, a lot of investors actually look at impact in first sense as social impact. The word impact that comes to their mind is social impact. And I think we are in a unique position with this industry, especially the end of life recycling, where you potentially have climate/environmental impact, but then you also have the whole social impact. And I think it is kind of incumbent upon folks like us and maybe others, and banks are doing that as well, to channel external capital. But if you channel external capital, there has to be some level of there will be some level of a requirement that social impact, environmental impact comes in. And that's the way that we look at it as well. Can we try to create our own policies whereby you have climate plus social impact to some extent? And from what we've been hearing today, the entry into force of the Hong Kong Convention regulations will play a role in ensuring that even smaller, weaker owners are needing to send their ships to compliant yards rather than being able to dodge, if I could use that pejorative word.
Fair point, and truth be told, I'm not an expert on the regulations per se, but I do realize, and I do take to folks who have come on the stage before me who've said an even regulation is a good way. So till what was it, last year, we didn't have an even regulation, and now it's ratified, so you should be coming into force. The question then remains, is Hong Kong Convention applied individually in different countries at the same level of enforcement as others, right? So that's something to keep an eye out on. And so far as smaller ship owners go, I can only imagine that that regulation will help them or maybe the other way around. Regulation will make an even playing field so that they don't necessarily receive a lower price for the better recycled steel. I think maybe that's the way to look at it. Why should we have to give up from our pocket?
Kunus Ola, few references to the responsible ship recycling standards, which in a way are sort of the Poseidon principles for scrapping. What impact has that initiative had, do you feel, on the on your approach to this business and how clients have managed it?
Well, it's we have there's a lot of ESG issues in shipping, and we carefully examine those and the risks on client by client basis and by transactions. It's obviously climate is the number one transition, and recycling number two. So we put a lot of emphasis on it, and we engage client, and I think. Mostly positive reception by clients, but not always, because we don't recycle the ships. It's not some have that kind of attitude. It's another business. We don't regulate it. It's not no standard. There's a capacity issue and all those arguments. So there may be some resistance among a few clients, but generally positive. But we have then seen a real shift when it comes to attitude, having full ESG policies, including recycling policies in place, and the acceptance of having the clauses in the beginning. The idea was to, most financing in shipping is based on a mortgage, right? Secured financing. So, whenever whatever ship you have a mortgage on, you're required to have this clause in the loan agreement. That was in the beginning, for that particular loan you had. Now we are extending that to apply to the whole group. So it's not only
corporate.
Corporate.
Yep.
Not always successful, but we push for that all the time. So I will say, yes, it has had an impact on the way we do business, how we engage client, and I dare to say it also has had an impact on the client and some of the behavior. Of course, the banks can't take credit for all of that, because that's been in parallel with a general increased focus from society in general, from the press, from equity investors, etc. There are some pension funds out there who has been very, very vocal. So, in total, I think the financiers and the investors have made a huge impact.
How do you deal with the reticent ship owners who you would like to keep as clients? Do their loan margins creep up by a few basis points?
If they don't comply, you mean?
Well, if they're not, they're reticent about.
It's the easy way is, of course, to do the exclusion thing. You don't have them as client, but it's not as easy to offload client as it is in an equity investor. You can just sell the shares. So we have exited a few clients, but that's the exception. Plan A is to kind of gradually work with the client to seek for improve the practices. So that's. Pricing is a matter of the total risk on the client, which is a number of parameters. But to the extent, we have a very thorough ESG checklist and additional analysis, and if there are negative on, not having policies, have been engaged in unsustainable recycling, blah, 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 it's a red flag, and the decision is escalated.
Yeah. Stefan, forgive me for not having checked beforehand, but are you members of the signatories to the Responsible Ship Recycling?
Yes.
You are. When I was reading it through a couple of days ago in preparation, it did strike me that an awful lot of it was, if I could be slightly rude, rather boilerplate.
Oh.
That's
rude.
Well, as in, I mean rude, as in really, you're not asking for people for any stretch.
Yeah.
You are asking people to do what they are required to do in a legal term.
Yeah, Julian, you forget, and I mentioned that before, like when we joined in 2018, it was not the reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why we.
So there
joined.
has been a change. That's what
There has been a change. Yeah. Now everybody's talking Hong Kong Convention. The ratification comes into place 2025. But that was not the case when you joined 5-6 years ago. So we really we also wanted to increase the awareness with the ship owners that the financial institution take it serious. Yeah? And we want that also the ship owners take care of sustainability. And the development is really good. I mean, 10 years ago, I don't know how many ship owners had a sustainability report.
Yeah.
Indeed, indeed.
The major ship owners now have a sustainability report. The major ship owners, when you go on the web pages, they even publish their ship recycling policy there. So there's a major shift. And now this ratification gives us as an RSIS group a very good opportunity to develop our initiative as well. Because with the new IMO regulations on greenhouse gases, a lot of ships will need recycling in the next 10 years. Yeah, and we have to find the right solutions, and that's why collaboration is good. These conferences are good to find the right solutions for that we make ship recycling more sustainable and develop it further.
Do you have clients, or have you had clients who have been reticent about agreeing to the terms of the responsible?
Not so many. I mean, clients are always a little bit reluctant to include new clauses as standard. Yeah, they have the standards. No, I don't want to give them away. But we had really good discussions, and really the vast majority of the clients, they have ship recycling policies now in place, and they're happy to accept the clauses.
Yeah. Retri, you came from ABN AMRO, which was obviously one of the originators of this, but you're not a signatory to the responsible ship recycling regulation. Could they apply to you? Could you sign, or is it something that you don't believe is appropriate? And if so, why? What's your thinking?
Actually, we took a decision as a smaller fund not to sign up for instance, Poseidon Principles, and for that matter, RSRS.
Is that? I mean, do you feel they could apply to you in theory if you wish to? And so why not?
Yeah. So it's a good question, and one of the reason, I mean, it's, whenever you apply to some of these things as a small fund, it'll give us a good sticker kind of statement. We are signatories to Poseidon Principles. But one must remember, and I come from those shops where you have these big boys who are in that, and they have certain other also compelling reasons to set certain trajectories, right? I mean, maybe the other two gentlemen will say it better, or certain requirements. We are not a big player, right? What we need to do is we need to set out very clearly our ESG policy. We got to set out on our website what are we doing for climate/social, and we have to get that certified. And we're in the process of getting one of the classes to actually certify us. And I think so far as we're concerned, that's what we can control, right? I think being signatory to a larger, I don't know, convention, framework. Yep. I think for us, with the kind of difference we're trying to make, we might get sucked into some other kind of discussions there. So it was a big discussion internally. Like I said, least path of resistance, sign up to a big framework, stick it in your product's packaging, and off you go, right? But I think we look at it slightly differently.
Thanks. I'll be open to any questions in a moment or two if anyone has them. That question of the impact of the Poseidon Principles, of course, has been front and centre for some of the world's biggest banks. In fact, the world's biggest shipping bank today, BNP Paribas, that was whacked on the back of the head with its cruise ship loan book that obviously had a very poor CII rating, effectively with the EEXI, isn't it? The AER. Part of that.
The AER Poseidon, yeah. Oh, we were in the same category.
Yeah.
You need to understand how AER works to understand the Poseidon scores.
This question of risk, though, obviously spreads beyond as I say, it's more than motherhood and apple pie, the responsible ship recycling rules, but they are very clearly laid out. We've heard over the last couple of days that even ChatGPT can't solve the conflicts and confusions between the regulatory, different regulatory frameworks.
But
how are you looking? How are you managing that risk with your clients when there is so many uncertainties? Stefan?
I mean, you can ask ChatGPT as well if they find a solution for bank regulation as well, which is tough. Yeah, and I can say we hired a lot of people to always comply with the bank regulations. And I mean, according to our loan agreements, of course they have clauses, undertakings that the clients, the ship owners, need to be comply with the respective local laws. Yeah, and that's what we expect. We cannot take care of the regulations of all the ship owners. So I can just say it's important that they do a proper due diligence. They are experts also here in the room to ask them what's the best way really to fulfill these regulations.
They are the ones responsible for running their business effectively.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you said you read it's deliberate. You read the standard. You thought it was a little bit too weak or something, but
Pro forma, if I'm being right.
I'm responsible for part of writing it, so that's okay. But it's deliberately a little bit. This, looking at the loan agreements becoming longer and longer, and there's so many requirements and demands upon our ship owners. So you want a more positive spin. What matters is what the effect, what will be the result, and that's been very positive, as Stefan says. But the point there, when you saw that, is we have some kind of expectations and recommendations to our owners, where it's about making informed decisions on recycling based on due diligence, and preferably also following up with the reporting in retrospect. We have some expectations to the process, and then it's not up to us to. We are not standard setters or regulators. We have realized that an SOC regarding the Hong Kong Convention can be a rather thin paper, and that as Darren said earlier, there are distinct differences between some of these yards.
Indeed.
I went to Alang myself. I saw that, same yards with the Hong Kong Convention certificate, they looked very different.
Yeah. So is there any agenda for updating, revising, amending the responsible ship recycling?
I think we were taken a little bit by surprise by the ratification coming out in June, so we haven't gotten that far.
It wasn't only you, don't worry.
But we have raised the question.
Yeah.
We have raised the same question, and we will look into it without predicting the outcome, but we probably need to revise and rethink, what we communicate and where do we set our expectations. But it's a big milestone. Now, I would like to add that 2023 is actually a fantastic year when it comes to milestones in shipping regulations. Number one, IMO in July agreed on a net zero ambition and targets, which will be followed up by regulations. EU, it's been talked about for a few years, but only in 2023 the final decision and details of the EU ETS came about. So we have the first international carbon pricing in shipping, and then we had the Hong Kong Convention. These are all great news in shipping.
Absolutely, and we also invite Asian banks to join the responsible ship recycling standards, because at the moment they're just European banks in the club. And of course, when we want to further develop the initiative, then all the Asian banks are welcome to join RSIS and develop it with us together.
Are there any specific questions that they tend to have?
I don't know. I mean, then you have next time panel. Invite them.
Rajbir.
No, I was just going to add, I think we as an industry should pat our back, and we're all stakeholders in an industry, for the reason Knut said. I think people outside the industry fail to realize this is the only industry that has a UN regulator, right, effectively. So you've got 170 countries you've got to put their heads together. You'd name one other industry out there that has collectively, as a world, come together and said, we're going to reach net zero near 2050. I think that's a great achievement. And I don't think that gets enough headlines. Similarly, as an institution, IMO or UN, and you have these conventions like the Hong Kong Conventions ratified across hundreds of countries, right? Which other industry has these kind of? So I think to the extent that we have issues and things take time and things are, EU is a bit different and EU has always been tried to be a bit further ahead. But I think in general we're heading definitely in the right direction. One thing I might add though, so as part of the work that we do and try to spend time with impact investors, try to bring capital into this industry from slightly different angles. If you look at, I think Bloomberg runs its own sustainability index, and I think MSCI with Sustainalytics or someone else runs another index, and Michael Weber in the US is famously running a ESG index. You have these people who are running indexes. You kind of open that box. As far as I know, there's nothing on recycling in there. There's things on, lost time because of incident rates. There's things about, spillage of oil. Why is ship recycling not getting into those indexes? And fair enough that the big, mostly the listed companies and so on, so prescribe, subscribe, and this is the data. But at least that's a start, right? So I think RSRS is a great initiative on the back of what banks do, but banks are private institutions, right, to a large extent. I think if you get these kind of metrics and KPIs into these sustainability indexes, you suddenly have maybe more interest in the sector.
In a moment, I'll ask you all about your view of where we are in markets in this world of geopolitical upheavals and volatility. Before that, any questions before we wrap up?
Yes.
Yeah, please, Ronald. There's a microphone coming.
I don't need mic, I think.
We can hear you.
Very concrete question. Suppose I'm a ship owner. I want to build a new ship, and I told you the ship is going to be EU flagged. We have had now the EU Taxonomy Act. What does this concrete mean for the ship owner flying a European flag if they want a loan from the bank, knowing that the depreciation of the ship will be different because of the obligation to recycle it properly on the EU facility. So there's a price difference in the ends of the ship.
Who would like to take that one?
I can give it a shot because I'm not a bank, so I can say what I want, right?
Thank you, Austria.
I'll get a beer of you guys later. No, but that's a fair question. One thing that's important to note is, and I'm sure, or I'm hoping that two other gentlemen will nod when I say this, is that at least when I was with the banks, the way you model out your credit risk and so on is not on the last dollar in recycling. In fact, you never even model in recycling, right? So from a point of view of depreciation or 20 years recycling, you said if there's a price difference there, you're probably not looking to the banks. You're probably looking at the equity owner to say, what are you going to do about this? So I think there's a bit of a difference there in how you look at the risk.
Even as a bank, I can support that's a fair assessment. For a new building, sometimes there are, ECAs, export credit agencies facilities up to 12 years, but the normal tenor of shipping loan is 5, 6 years, right? Yep. And you model that based on where on the cycle and what residual value, etc. should be. You have huge margins on that, so the tail end difference there, and that will change in 25 years, right? So it's
Stefan,
we actually finance ship owners, and when we believe that it's a good ship owner with a stable business model, and if the ship owner makes a decision to use EU flag, then we think it's a good decision, and there's enough risk diversification over the fleet. So we very much look into the ship owner balance sheet, P&L, fleet. And that's why this is really much the decision of the ship owner, and we have nothing to say there.
Exactly the same here. We like to say we don't finance ship, we finance ship owners. Always who before what, who we finance before what we finance is the question.
Shipping markets for the last 3 years have been, they've been, in most markets, they've hit all-time highs, and a lot of owners have made a huge amount of money, paid down debt. Today, things are looking somewhat more uncertain. Some markets are strong, others looking uncertain. There is this world of great geopolitical uncertainty. You've got the layered into that issues, particularly around the energy transition. Rajbi, you're looking to bring investors in to find projects. Is there still enthusiasm, appetite for the sort of risk that shipping presents?
From my lens, I think we need to get the word out there on what we are trying to do as an industry. I think in our own little circles, we spend time in these conferences. We are trying to break out of it. I was at the UNPRI conference last week, and two of my colleagues were at the GIN conference in Copenhagen. These are impact investor conferences. I'm not suggesting we came back with buckets loads of money, but if I look at, in the UNPRI, and I got this app, which never works, by the way, but anyway, it's a different discussion. But then I looked for who's got maritime, who's got ocean, whose name is something to do with maritime, right, as a fund or as an institution. There was ourselves, and then there was the World Wildlife Fund, Forum, my apologies. And rightly so, they were looking at life below water, right? And whales getting hit by ships, etc., which is obviously a big issue as well. But literally, these are the two people who are sitting at a UN issue. Why is IMO not there? Why are other institutions not there who are coming there and sitting there saying, listen, maritime is trying to do a lot. Why are we not, trumpeting ourselves? And I think that's the way to attract capital. You go and tell somebody what's a ship. Oh, isn't that a dirty business? Said, per ton basis, it's the cleanest business in the world. Right? By the way, 80% of what you're wearing and what you drive and the energy that you take in your iPhone has come on a ship. Right? Oh, I didn't know that. So I think the only reason shipping makes it to the front page is when the Suez Canal was blocked, or there's a mishap. So why not for good reasons? So to answer your question, we make an effort, but I think more needs to be done to try and channel capital.
Stefan?
Actually, I think shipping is a very attractive industry, also for investors. I mean, for example, we're talking to insurers at the moment, and they like 10 years ago when you talk to risk insurers, for example, they say, oh, shipping, no, it's too volatile, we don't want to have that risk in our portfolio. But it has changed. I mean, the last 3-4 years, also because of what happened in the markets, were really good for shipping. And there was consolidations, the ship owners take sustainability very serious. So there are really good trends. I think shipping is on a very good way and attractive to investors and still for lenders as well.
I fully agree. Of course, some other worst thing you ever can say is this time is different. But at least comparing to the last major shipping crisis, looking at the order book, the supply side of things is totally different. Yeah. And I think also the price of money for banks has gone up, banking regulations, so at least the banks are very different in how they take on shipping risk and handle portfolio risk, etc., than they were prior to the financial crisis, so that's for sure. So it's, it's good.
Good, thank you. We better wrap up there. So if you'd like to, actually, very quickly, Henning, if you make it brief, Henning, and if just one of us.
Yeah, I try to. Starting at the other end, not with ship recycling, but with new building and financing thereof. Have you ever considered to verify that the ship is built as per the specification, like under SOLAS, asbestos-free? Because that has a huge impact. We just dealt with 3 ro-ro vessels having 12,000 square meters of asbestos containing insulation materials. That was easily 10 million US per ship to sort it out.
Any comments?
It's a very good question. I would expect that the Glass Society takes care and have a look and shipyard. So this is something we can have a look. So happy to have a talk afterwards.
Yeah, I agree with Stefan. At least from my days previously with the banks, that wasn't an area we looked at particularly. I think ESG in the new building sector is something that we should all be looking at. I think that's something that is often not looked at deep enough.
Thanks. If you'd like to show your appreciation for the to the panelists, my thanks to them. And next up, could I invite to the podium? We've got a short presentation from Nick Walker, partner at Watson Farley Williams, on navigating the Hong Kong Convention, compliance in a moment of flux. Nick, thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. I should start by saying I'm not a shipping lawyer. I'm a regulatory specialist. I operate in multiple sectors, usually fighting with regulators or telling clients how to avoid them. So this is my take on the compliance regime. Sorry, I can't. Can someone help me? There we go. So this is a lawyer when a client comes to them and tells them that they want to recycle a ship to the highest possible environmental and safety standards and in compliance with the law. Now, we're not allowed to use ChatGPT because there was an American lawyer who was famously disbarred when he submitted a pleading to court that ChatGPT had written for him, and didn't realise that ChatGPT had actually made up all of the cases that were cited. So he was fired. But you know, it is a real challenge, and very often it is not possible to recycle a ship to the highest possible standards and in compliance with all law. This is a slide that I've used for years, which just sets out the main criteria of the main bits of regulation: Hong Kong, EUSRR, BAL, and the waste shipment regulation. I don't intend to go through it, but I think I'll probably just focus on Hong Kong and the ship recycling regulation. And they're supposed to be cradle to grave regulation for ships. And I'd take issue with both of those aspects, because the cradle aspects I don't think is very much in focus, and that's a real shame, because the recycling plan and the recycling journey should start as soon as a ship is being planned, not less built. And I think there's a real gap there for lenders and policymakers to try and focus on the start of the ship's life and how it can kind of go through and make the end of its life much more straightforward. As for the grave bit, we've heard quite a lot about the fact that Hong Kong doesn't cover downstream processing and waste management. So I'd say it's probably the mortuary rather than the grave that it covers. And that needs to be kind of resolved as well. So just a few comments on Hong Kong. We've heard again over the last couple of days the importance of having a really good IHM. I completely agree with that. I think that there are things that industry and the regulators can do to try and achieve that, because if you think of an IHM, that's kind of like the middle part of the recycling journey. And if it's good, and if people are forced to make sure that it's detailed, then it makes the end of life much easier. I think for ship owners in other industries, you have like a health and safety file which sort of performs pretty much the same task as an IHM, and it's considered a really important part of the kind of documents that go with infrastructure. So on an offshore wind farm, for example, you'll have a health and safety file, which is a computer file, which is hundreds and hundreds of pages and details every single aspect of every single turbine. And that's built into the cost of developing the wind farm, and it's kept up to date. Even on older buildings, you'll have a health and safety file, and I've seen transactions stall and eventually abort because the buyer wasn't confident that the file was up to date or accurate. And I think the industry needs to have that same attitude to IHMs as well. They're not just an afterthought, they're the kind of one of the main documents that accompany a ship. As for the regulators, they need to look at IHMs in more detail, and I think this is a point that came out yesterday. It's surprising that the EU hasn't really been flexing its muscles in this regard. If you look at the ship recycling regulation, the provisions around port state control are actually pretty loose, which is perhaps why it's not coming up as an issue. But if it were to enforce more regularly, then the standard would go up inevitably. Basel Convention, sorry, just to say about Hong Kong as well, another potential issue with it is that it's very process driven. So if you follow the process, then you can say that you've complied with it, and perhaps to some extent ignore the outcomes. And that's I think a weakness. That isn't necessarily the same with Basel, which is much more focused on outcomes. But unfortunately, the process isn't so good. So what we've got on the slide here is a consultation which was held in November last year about the prior informed consent process. It only attracted 6 or 7 responses, but there were a list of complaints with which anyone who's tried to get prior informed consent will recognise. It's very slow. It's very difficult to find relevant competent authorities. Sometimes the transactions, it has to happen by paper rather than electronically, and it causes a huge burden, even if you've got an owner that is trying to do the right thing and comply fully. We had a case a few years ago where a client was scrapping a ship, and it was going from Singapore to India, had a really detailed recycling plan, had observers on the ground with the right to stop work. It was going to be recycled to the highest possible standards. At the last minute, before it was due to set sail, their local regulator popped up and asked about Basel compliance, which set everyone panicking. We contacted the Singapore regulator on a no-names basis, and they said they had no idea that they could do PIC for a ship. They'd never done it before, and they didn't think it was possible. So when you've got the regulator saying that, who's supposed to be issuing the consent, you have to kind of face a choice, really, of having a massive delay in time and costs, or just going and accepting that, you know, the fines for breaching BAL are local and very often very low indeed, if they're enforced. The EU, everyone's favourite subject. There are still countries in the EU that haven't brought the enforcement provisions of the ship recycling regulation into law, including Germany, which is quite unusual because it's usually the sort of class swap amongst the member states. Bizarrely, the Commission hasn't done anything about that. I think there are difficulties in complying with the ship recycling regulation. We had a case recently where there was a Greek passenger ferry, Greek flagged, to be recycled in Turkey in accordance with the ship recycling regulation, but the yard insisted that in order to gain entry into Turkey, the ship had to be sailed to Romania and then reflagged with a Romanian flag and then taken to Turkey, which is obviously a huge risk because, you know, what's to say that it's not going to be reflagged and then sailed out of the EU? So there are definite problems with the ship recycling regulation as well. And I think there's no doubt that it distorts the market. We advised an Italian owner a few years ago he had an Italian ferry, Italian flagged, and the value he'd been offered by yards on the approved list was less than half that he could have got if he'd gone elsewhere. And it really demotivates people from keeping the EU flag when there's that much distortion in the market, I think. Just a quick note about the review of the ship recycling regulation. There's an article that we wrote on it a few months ago, which there's a link to at the end of this presentation. It looks like they're moving towards a kind of financial instrument model to cover the cost and risk of recycling. I think it looks very complicated, and it's difficult to see how it would work. But what I don't think would be overly complicated is if you had, as they do in other industries, for example, oil and gas, offshore wind, a decommissioning plan that has to be prepared and approved right at the start of life before operations are carried out, and it has to be updated. And the costs of decommissioning, or in this case recycling, have to be backed up with some form of security. And when that, whether it's an oil project or an offshore wind farm, when it's sold on, the buyer has to take on the financial security, and they have to keep these things updated. I don't see that would be hugely difficult to do, and it would make life much easier when the ship does reach end of life. Just a point to note at the bottom there, flags of convenience. I think Martin mentioned this morning about kind of sometimes you do have to flag out, and it's something that does happen. I also know for a fact that it's something that the Commission are looking at right now. So, you know, I would watch this space because it's something that they are looking to regulate. Having stood here and moaned about the law for the last 10 minutes, I do still think that things are going to change, and this is why. There's an absolute avalanche of regulation coming into force which looks at supply chains and value chains. I won't go through all of them because I'll confuse everyone, including myself, but just to note, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that came into force in January. That forces companies of a certain size to report on their impacts on the climate and the potential impacts of the climate and climate change on them and their business. It's going to have a much wider impact than that, though, because they have to go down their supply chain and get information from people in their supply chain. So everybody's going to be affected by this. CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, I'm not going to kind of really go into that beyond saying that I think someone said this morning that it was coming into force in 26. It's actually already came into force at the beginning of this month, but we're at a reporting stage. So it's not until 26 that you'll have to buy allowances to cover displaced carbon. Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, CS3D, which is perhaps the nattiest acronym. That is a requirement. It's draft at the moment, but it forces people to do due diligence on those in their supply chain. So again, you can see the impact that this is going to have on shipping and then on the life cycle of a vessel. And finally, the EU ETS, the Emissions Trading System, Maritime is coming into that next year. It's pretty much all I'm spending my time on at the moment, and it's going to be very difficult for owners and charterers to comply, but it will have an impact. And I think probably to summarise, all of these in some way or another are focused on getting people to look at their supply chains or the value chain, get data on it and be more transparent. And so I think it's inevitable that that is going to have an effect on shipping as well. So finally, not quite finally, the Balancing Act. I don't think there's any doubt that the EU is the villain in the room today and yesterday, and I think there's often a debate about whether their environmental regulation in particular is kind of just protecting their own market. I take the view that it is, but it's also driving environmental standards as well, and there's no reason why you can't do both at the same time. But the EU has always been keen to be at the vanguard of this kind of legislation, and I can't see them stopping. I don't think that the ship recycling regulation will be repealed. I think it will be amended and updated. So we just have to get used to it, I think. Finally, the Sustainability Imperative Report is something that my firm did a couple of years ago. Early this year, we did an update. So we took the pulse of the industry with 500 leaders from all parts of the sector, asking them a series of questions. There's a QR code. It's definitely worth reading, but I think there's some interesting findings to come out of it. There seems to be a focus on ESG. People are really starting to look at it. There is a recurring question of who is going to be shouldering the risk and cost of developing new technologies, and I think that's true for the cost of recycling as well. There's always a tension between charter and owner about how you comply with these things and who meets the costs. And I think it's very easy to sit here and give the owners a good kick in for not doing enough with recycling, but very often there's charterers in the background that are kind of calling the shots, or at least having a big influence in the way that decisions are taken about costs. And the final point is that 89% of respondents support expansion of the Poseidon principles to ESG, and including recycling. That was just touched on briefly in the previous panel. I think it's a really good idea, but there's no indication that that is going to be happening just yet. Thank you. There's the QR codes to the articles and the Sustainability Imperative Report.
Many thanks, Nick, and I can recommend that sustainability report if anybody hasn't read it. Very interesting piece of work. Now, the last session of the day, the 2 days, in fact. So if I may invite our panelists up. We have Captain Wolfram Gunterman, the Director of Regulatory Affairs of Hapag-Lloyd, Annette Ronov, the Chief Sustainability Officer for Wallenius Wilhelmsen, Jessie Lynn Lai, the Head of Public Affairs for Southeast Asia, Oceania at Maersk, Kumiko Iwasa, the Chair of the Ship Recycling Committee of the Japanese Shipowners Association, Sotiris Rapsis, the Secretary General of the European Community Shipowners Associations, and last but never ever least, Anil Sharma, the founder and CEO of GMS. So, please. I think there's one seat down here. Anil, you come this way.
Or shall I move?
Nobody wants to sit close to you, or what? Nobody wants to sit close to you.
You know how bad it is.
I got the hot seat here.
You're an amateur.
Thank you. I thought Julian would be sitting here.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks to Jessie Lynn for being a late addition to the panel. Very much appreciated. We've heard so much over the last few days about the progress being made, the contradictions and problems that the overlapping regulations make, and then the practical issues around working with these things. I would just like to start off talking to the ship owners in particular about how the ratification and then the entry into force is changing the perspective for them, whether it has, whether it will, whether you're going beyond or beneath. You know, what does this add up to, and how do you think it'll change the market? Could I turn to you, Annette, first of all, for your perspective from Wallenius Wilhelmsen?
Of course, thank you, Julian. I think initially we are really pleased that it has been ratified. We are a strong advocate for a level playing field, as has been discussed earlier on today. We really need that in an industry as ours, which is so international and subject to kind of local, national, international, and the global regional regulations. Will it change how we work? Wallenius Wilhelmsen has a long history in responsible ship recycling. We have had a policy. We have been a founding member, one of the founding members of the SRTI, and we have a responsible ship recycling policy and also a human rights policy. We have since 2009 recycled 32 vessels in a responsible manner. That means that we have vetted the yards before we select them, and have supervision by external surveyors that it's being done in the right manner, and also completion report outwards. And we report on, as part of the SRTI, on which vessels and where they have been recycled. So I don't think it will change the way we work. Coming back to the good presentation by Nick, I think there are other regulations coming from the EU. We are a listed company in Norway, so subject to EU regulations, both from the Sustainability Reporting Directive, but also the Due Diligence Directive. And that means that it looks at the whole value chain, not only our own operations and inside what we can directly control, but we have responsibility throughout the supply chain, both upstream and also downstream. So in that respect, we will still have to be compliant.
Gunther, like Wallenius Wilhelmsen, you've actually paid money to have ships recycled to the levels that you've been aspiring to in recent years. Does the entry into force of the Hong Kong Convention change the game for you in any particular way? And do you think the actors you're working with will be changed by the entry into force?
I'm afraid, although we are definitely pleased that the Hong Kong Convention has been ratified finally, we still have a long way to walk until I think some of you guys even calculated the seconds and minutes until June 2025. No, we are around now for 176 years, a German-based company, so that means we are also tightly married to the EU SRR, and actually we have committed in our recycling policy, which is clearly visible on our webpage and also part of, similar as Annette mentioned, we are also a founding member of the Ship Recycling Transparency Initiative. So that's where we are. We have committed ourselves to the EU SRR. We are strictly adhering it. And when it comes to reflagging, we don't see a level playing field. Actually, you will be astonished about what I'm going to say. Yes, we reflagged the ship, which recently went to a facility in Turkey, to the German flag, to be fully compliant, to be absolutely sure to be by the book. So please understand, I'm not going to talk about money and prices. We are with competitors here.
I think historically you had, but I appreciate that. But it costs money to do that sort of thing, basically. Yeah.
Nothing is for free.
Nothing is for free. Jessie Lynn Lai from Maersk, could I ask you the same point? Obviously, Maersk has a long track record in aspiring to high standards. You've taken a few steps forward and a few steps back on times, but where do you stand today with the entry into force?
No, thank you for the opportunity to share. Because likewise, we are also a founding member of the SRTI because we believe that information is key. By publishing all the past and present information, it will empower people to make decisions, and it impacts the entire value chain on how maritime or ship recycling is being perceived. And of course, we welcome any feedback, and since 2016, we have developed the Responsible Ship Recycling Standard that is to provide guidance in the absence of overarching guidelines or conventions that is in effect presently. So I think from our experience working with our shipyards, we have seen good results in terms of like not having any health or safety incidents being reported since 2017. We believe it's a good indicator that this model works for us, and we strongly encourage the broader industry to adopt similar standards and pursue a greater ambition to set a better direction for the entire industry.
Sotiris at the far end, we just heard from three of the biggest, three of the most committed European Scandinavian ship owners on this issue. Does the ratification clarify the position for more broadly European ship owners? And what concerns have you got about these lingering and very deep-seated contradictions and how they can be resolved?
I think there are reasons to be optimistic after ratification of the Hong Kong Convention. To be honest with you, when we visited with the Norwegian ambassador, Bangladesh, it was 4 months ago, 5 months ago. Nobody really believed that Bangladesh will ratify the convention. And we're quite pessimistic that we're running out of time and that the Hong Kong Convention will never be ratified or enter into force. It's a tremendous success. The fact that we have a global standard in place. This is a reason to be optimistic. The other reason to be optimistic is to look at the progress made, the real tremendous progress made in the yards, in India, in Bangladesh, even in anticipation of having a global standard in place. And to be honest with you, the EU ship recycling regulation also played a role there. On the other hand, there are reasons to be pessimistic. And I would start with taking a look at the geopolitical situation and with the EU becoming more cautious towards open trade and introducing certain regulations, not only to enhance the environmental standards, but also as in a way to repatriate back to the EU industrial activities. And this is also a situation that we need to deal with. For instance, there was a document leaked this morning that the US and the EU are seriously considering to introduce tariffs, import tariffs on steel and aluminium up to 25% in the next few weeks. So we're seeing that the geopolitical environment is changing, is quite unstable, and this is also reflected in the environmental regulations we're dealing with. I don't need to repeat or list the number of the regulations that are in place, both at international and EU level, but we shouldn't give up. I think that we made a tremendous progress the last few months, and we should keep pushing. We should bring more into the front line positive stories about the progress, the tremendous progress made in the yards in India and in Bangladesh, and to engage also more the European policymakers. It's unfortunate that they're not present here today, but it's not only the Commission. Some people may think that the EU operates like the IMO. It's the opposite. We deal with politicians, elected politicians, and we need to deliver the message from our industry. Some people said that it's not a big deal because it's the European regulations. Still, though, EU companies control 40% of the global fleet.
Thank you. I'd like to come back, if we have time, to talk a little more about the impact of the European provisions and the possible amendments there. Before we do that, though, Kamiko, may I ask you for your perspective from the Japanese Shipowners Association?
Thank you very much for sharing us. For us, Japanese owners, the news of the implementation of the Hong Kong Convention is just really optimistic news for us. And for a long time advocate for the HKC, for us, it's a really fruitful news. And we are partially really contribute to, we are proud to contribute to make it implemented. As a JSA, we have recommended to major member companies that they sell their ships for recycling yards that comply with the HKC even before the requirement of the activation has not been fulfilled. And many members had actually selected excellent yards complying with the HKC as buyers of their ships. I think maybe those good shipping companies, European shipping companies, many of our member Japanese companies actually sell the ships, the HKC compliant yard, referring to the Class NK certificate. And some of them even added to their own elements, additionally to the HKC element, like IHM. They voluntarily already prepared the IHM before they sell their ships to the yards. And as the JSA also send a delegation to the yard, India, Bangladesh, China, more than 10 times for this decade, and together with the Japanese government, Class NK, even labor unions. So we believe those actions contribute and motivate to yards, recycling yards, to upgrade by themselves. And so.
Thank you, Kamiko, for that. Let's leave it there.
Sorry, it's become too long.
No. Thank you so much. Anil, Anil Sharma, could I put to you, yesterday morning, despite the optimism around the ratification that as Sotira said, that even people quite close to this a few months ago were not actually believing would happen. It did come through. But we heard from Haresh Parmar from India, who accused the world's ship owners, collectively, many of them larger ship owners, of course, of what he colourfully said were games of convenience that was helping to drive down prices and avoid their responsibilities. For the Hong Kong Convention to be a force, it needs to be complied with, and the national governments will need to uphold their standards. Do you believe the frameworks of the national governments in Pakistan, Bangladesh and India and possibly Pakistan will be able to maintain those frameworks to hold the yards to adequate standards?
Yeah. Let me start. First, I'll answer your question, but I want to also go back to some of the responses we have received here. The easy answer is yes and no, meaning some of the governments will be. We have a 2-year runway, and especially when it comes to India, there was a long runway ahead of us. In fact, next week, as you know, there's a huge conference in India on Maritime Summit, and there was a huge session on ship recycling with a lot of world players at stage. So there's a strong commitment from the Indian government to do that. I see also the same kind of commitment coming out of Bangladesh that's coming in. So I think that will be there. There'll be a lot of debates and discussions about industry standards. So I think that can be done. Pakistan, I'm not too sure. I saw Saif Ali Khan's presentation. There is an attempt, but I can't comment on that. I think they're a bit behind. But I want to say something, because when I hear the ship owners here, and what you said was the very beginning opening statement, that the D word, right? And this should not, this is the only conference you're not going to hear the D word. I'm going to bring up the D word in a second. But what you had here was the H word, right? The Hong Kong Convention. And when I heard the speakers, it dawned on me, I wish I had a pen and paper. I was realizing when a ship owner sells a ship, especially a European ship owner, he or she, they have lots of risks they have to address, right? You have your environmental, social, governance, operational, technical, financial, technological, whatever you can. So there would be about 5 to 10 risks that they have to address. What I find is when you're a listed European company, your biggest risk becomes your headline risk. Last thing an owner wants to see is themselves being on the front page of your newspaper for the wrong reasons, right? Even if the appearance is, I've done everything great, it's still the appearance is there. So as a result, you're ready to give up the financial, everything else to come into to make sure you cover the headline risk. My view is very clear. You cannot have sustainable ship recycling without taking into consideration economic risks. As a gentleman who asked in a previous session, that I'm going to build a ship in Europe, flag it Europe, and will you give me cheap money or loans and residual values? That risk has to be there. I mean, the financial value has to be there. Business cannot run on sustainability forever without saying there is no regard to economic value. So what we are trying to create now is, first of all, standards, and then how you create value and sustainability. And why I'm bringing the D word, the decarbonization, we have got the whole ship recycling narrative wrong. We just have it wrong. We have been concentrating on EU versus HKC for the last 10 years. The real thing is, because we are talking about a circular economy and climate change and decarbonization, think for a minute how ship recycling plays a role. At least in India alone, I think we must have recycled about 65 million tons of steel so far. So what does that mean? First, let's look at the value. Why the Indian subcontinent pays more money than the yards in Europe? Very simple. 90% of a ship is steel. Now in India, out of this, I'm using India as an example. Out of that 90% of the steel, 70% is going to go straight into rolling mills. There is no melting furnace. 10% is going to go into a melting furnace. Another 10% is going to go straight repurpose, reuse. That's the economic value. Now take it to Europe. You recycle a ship in Europe, 85% of the steel is going to go into melting scrap, either into a furnace in Europe or you will transport it to Turkey, and I think Turkey said right now maybe we have too much scrap. So that goes in. So where decarbonization comes in, I'm just closing. So the three biggest, if you want to use the word polluters to the environment, is first is energy production, through coal and whatever else. Second is industrials, making steel. Third is transportation. I mean, maybe the order is different. So now when you recycle all this steel, you're addressing the issue of this energy. Less energy is needed to recycle, reuse a vessel. There is less transportation, and the industrials, the steel making, you're reduce the use. So that's where the value is coming. So HKC is creating this playing field. Yes, that's just another vertical, the regulation.
You raise a very interesting issue there, and I'd like to discuss this with the owners. Jesselyn, Maersk, you have had investigations into perhaps constructing your own recycling yard and turning that into a green steel feeder for your ships. Is that project ongoing? What results are there? And do you feel that having that process as part of your own supply chain can genuinely be seen as a sustainability asset for you as a company?
Yeah, I think this is the only way for us to move forward sustainably and really close the loop when it comes to circular economy for ship building and ship recycling, because if we don't source sustainably and start having green steel as part of your shipbuilding when you order the new vessels, there's no way that we can raise the value of scrap metal from ship recycling. So it has to start from there. And I think with that in place, with that mindset in place, then you could empower the yards to be able to raise the value and close the loop. And of course, it needs to be a requirement when you put in the order for your new vessels. So
sorry.
Yeah.
Please carry on.
We don't have the specific project that we are able to finalize and announce at this moment, but we're setting that, and we have few partners that are currently in talks with to go ahead with this strategy. And when you're talking about a lot of the smelters, steel mills are still really powering with coal and conventional fuels, it's not ideal at the present moment, because it's just we're not rethinking steel production in a sustainable manner at this point.
It's a chicken and egg situation.
Yeah.
There's an issue with the production.
Exactly. So for Maersk, right now we have managed to break the whole greenfield chicken and egg debate, and hopefully, the next step for us is able to deal with green steel direction.
Annette, the Wallenius Wilhelmsen companies and those you have stakes in are very closely involved with customers, the shippers who are close to consumer markets. So things such as their green footprint, fuels are very important to you and your clients. Does the green recycling, the green steel aspect potentially of recycling responsibly add something to your sustainability footprint for your customers as yet? And if not yet, do you think it will come?
Not yet, but I think definitely it will come. We've seen the same journey. We have the OEMs, so the car manufacturers, as our key clients. They're doing that on aluminium, increasing their recycling and moving from steel to aluminium. So I think this will come to us too, but it's not there yet. I think that the moment is the D word, decarbonization, which is key.
Wolfram?
Well, personally, I would agree to the possibility to explore what can be done with regards to green steel. Whereas I think we have clearly to realize that we have to get a clear order how to straighten out things. and I have to come to the regulatory aspects. We have to straighten out the interaction between Hong Kong Convention, EU SRR, the Basel Convention. How will this be integrated with regards to the downstream waste management? And what I would also like to emphasize, I'm not downplaying what we are discussing here. This is just one small Lego brick in the whole spiel. We have greenhouse gas reduction, we have corporate responsibility, social responsibility, biodiversity, protection of whales was mentioned briefly. It is really, in our shop, 3 pillars which we really want to fill with life. So to get the regulatory landscape plain, that's really the challenging task which is ahead of us until June 2025. And yeah, you are right with the furnaces, with the coal, and we have now the Fit for 55 onshore power supply for all European ports as from January 1st, 2030. Where is the electricity coming from? Is it coming from brown coal or other coal? And I'm switching off my clean auxiliary engines. So what I want is, I don't want to distract. It's a huge wide ocean where we are sailing currently. So without downplaying, this is one piece, but we have really to follow the small baby steps first. Straighten the regulatory landscape, please regulators, and that we have legal certainty as ship owners and don't get a dawn raid visit. Don't quote that.
Let's hear about that. Sotiris, we've heard from the 3 last speakers. They have probably at least 1,000 ships on the water between them, and they are at the top level involved in consumer markets ultimately with their customers. There are an awful lot of ship owners, even still in Europe, as you say, with 40% of the world fleet, that really are not even close to that, and a lot of smaller owners as well in particular. Is talk of green steel and the circular economy relevant to the small European ship owner? And if not, how can it be made relevant and important to them?
I would agree that the first thing that we need to address urgently is the uncertainty, the legal uncertainty we're dealing with. I'm going to give you an example. The Basel ban entered into force December 2019. Up to that point, the Commission went and inspected yards in Alang in India. They made concrete comments, they published the reports. We were assessing also their own reports. We were pushing the Commission to do the final step and approve these yards into the EU list. What happened with the Basel ban? Out of the blue. Although everybody knew that the Basel ban will enter into force in December 2019, and as mentioned before, the EU had already transposed into the EU law the Basel ban for many years already. The Commission said that their legal interpretation is that after the Basel ban entered into force, they're not even allowed to go and assess the yards in Alang. Just to have a measure of the scale of the uncertainty we're facing and we're dealing with at EU level. And it took a new law to be proposed and go through all the legislative process in Brussels, the waste shipment regulation, to get the Commission to open again this legal possibility to assess the yards and get them into the list. So from our point of view, we need to urgently address the legal uncertainty. We have 3 main blocks: the Basel ban and the waste shipment regulation, the EU ship recycling regulation, and the Hong Kong Convention. To add on top of that, taxonomy. Somebody from the previous speakers mentioned taxonomy, which is quite important not only to the listed companies, but to everybody, to all shipping companies. It regulates access of the companies to financing. And the EU ship recycling regulation is on the list of the do no significant harm, meaning that even if you run a zero-emission ship tomorrow, you can be disqualified for green financing because somebody in the Commission might consider that you don't tick all the boxes of the EU ship recycling regulation. So we need urgently legal certainty, a global level playing field, and of course, sound environmental and safety standards.
I can only hear on that. It's such an important area, and I sometimes feel there are lots of politicians, and they will say, well, we expect the private industry to help here. And that's fine. We will find, as you're talking about the economics, we will find the most effective, efficient way of getting there, but they need to take the responsibility to provide the framework that we can navigate in. And I think that's one of the biggest risks, because if you are, when we have that, the ones that are sustainable and finding the right solutions, they will be the ones that are surviving and in the future and being economical and profitable.
Yeah, but if I may, I mean, that's my point. If you had the open forum to do that, you could, but then you have this big regulatory issue. You don't want that knock on the door, right?
No.
Or you don't want a headline risk, and that just ties your hand. Even if you believe so.
I have the impression in this debate, and I guess it isn't really the forum to try and get down to the nuts and bolts of how to unpack this, but there isn't much optimism, to use that warm, fluffy word, that this can be solved or will be solved in the near or even the medium term. Sotiris, I mean, if we could ask you, I mean, you are closest to this. Is that a fair interpretation of?
I'm by nature optimistic, to be honest with you, and nobody believed that we're going to get the Hong Kong Convention get ratified 5 months before. I mean, if it's a pragmatic approach, I think that we should take up on the fight, bring up the positive stories, make also concrete proposals. How can we change the situation, and bring also the policymakers into the game to get them engaged? I don't think that we should be pessimistic. We should give the fight.
Anil, how do you see this uncertainty and the nervousness amongst ship owners playing out when it comes to day-to-day business, and actually delivering ships that need to be recycled?
Yeah, that is a concern, right? Because the regulation has put itself into knots now, right? I mean, you have the HKC, the EU SSR. Naim, if you could, I mean, I had my guy said, what are these various regulations where some people may not even understand? So I made him a crude little boxes of all these regulations that exist right now, right? So here we have all this Basel and HKC on one side, and then you have all these regulations in Europe on the other side. Just stack them up. So when you stack these regulations, HKC is supposed to take care of all these boxes, right? Will it? The regulation has to make a decision. Probably not. These 4 boxes should actually go like that. And really this box should remain, but it won't happen, you know? I'm sorry. But I mean, this was the closest regulation. So my point is, the HKC should be doing that, but it's going to be a challenge, you know, because the Basel certainly comes in, the ban amendment comes into play. That's for Satori and his team to figure it out, how they're going to come out of it, and that requires guts. And you said I'm glad you said you're optimistic, because you really need the support and the will to people to educate themselves. That, you know, it was well-meaning regulation at one stage, but now IMO has come up with this nice little regulation. Even if you look at the effectiveness in the last 10 years since USRR and HKC has come, the role. Now you have Maersk and you know, MSC and those guys that are coming to India. They're saying we like HKC, right? And they're making an attempt to do it, and seems like they're having success with that. But if for your rightful reasons, you have a policy that you don't want to go to India, which I respect that as well. So I think there's a lot of dynamics here at play, and the main issue is regulation. Nobody wants a knock, number one, and number two is the headline risk. Once you take away these 2 shackles, I think you can make much more sensible, I don't know if sensible.
Anil, don't get me wrong. We didn't say we are not going to India. We need your progressive yards on the EU SRR list. That's the request.
Yeah, because you're making the assumption that EU SSR list is a better list than HKC, which it isn't. Right.
But that's the legal requirement.
That's what I say, it's a legal
we are adhering to by all means. Yeah. No discussion, sorry.
Yeah, no.
3 hours on Sentosa Island a little later, so let's keep this going. Kumiko, could I just ask you, luckily for you, the EU SRR is on the floor.
Yes.
But you do have the Hong Kong Convention, the
Sure.
Basel Convention and the Basel ban, because you're an OECD country. How is that playing out for your members, and how is that managed by your members, those contradictions?
We'd like to say we have to concentrate on now the Hong Kong Convention. EU SRR must be amended in line with the Hong Kong Convention, just in accordance with its own article, I understand. Well, of course, I know it is difficult and still it takes much time, so you're a bit struggled with that. But still, now we need Hong Kong concentrate on the Hong Kong Convention, and we need Hong Kong Convention compliant yards and increase more and more. And yeah, that's our hope. And Basel Convention, I understand it's a bit difficult, but Basel Convention should be exempted the Hong Kong Convention, and owners export their ships in accordance with the Hong Kong Convention should be totally free from Basel Convention. Of course, I know it's difficult, but it should be, we hope. Maybe all of us hope the same, I understand.
Thank you. Wolfram, a question on the app from Henning again. Henning Grumman, thank you, Henning. Asking, do you carry out due diligence audits before selling your ships for recycling? And how do you ensure that the requirements are fulfilled? And in the case there's a cash buyer, would you consider his team or her team of supervisors, or is the risk of conflict of interest too huge?
Actually, we have a vendor in the situation contracted now for many years. Very well-known, reliable contractor. And I'm afraid I cannot comment on the details, but that's in place. The philosophy, you have a supervisor in the shipyard when you are building a ship, you have a supervisor in the shipyard when you are dismantling a ship. That's it in a nutshell.
It's the same thing. So we had, you do vetting of the yards from an ESG point of view, and then have an independent supervisor to follow the process and make sure that it's done according to the requirements. I think that will remain due to all the regulations. You have to be responsible for who you choose to partner and who you sell to.
You have to own the process, effectively.
You do. And I think I just need to make one case. We're kind of talking about how regulation is driving this, but I think for many of the peers here and the partners in SRTI, when they started working on responsible ship recycling, it was not a regulation, it was a moral imperative and the right thing to do. And I think we can also lead and do the best we can to be responsible and live up to our own values.
Mm-hmm. There's another question here from Anonymous, which I always like the anonymous questions. That was why the app was invented, in fact.
Yeah.
He's asking a rather pointed question about how much sustainable recycling is going on at the Brownsville yard in the US, and making some rather some allegations that maybe will move over. But I mean, is anybody aware of Sotiris? You know, no. Anybody have any insight into that?
No.
Anil, going back to that question about the oversight of the audits, should cash buyers representatives be trusted to conduct the audits of the due diligence audits for recycling?
So my view is if you have the resources like our panelists here have it, they should have their own person. You know, it makes it cleaner. We have PR sitting there, which spends so there are people who can do that. But then there are owners who don't have the resources. And if indeed we want to do it in a sustainability, that's where we come in. I think the program we have this SSORP, it's because I've heard all these issues, and I like to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So that's why we created this. We have done 100, 110, but we're not competing with the main guys. We are just offering it to people who otherwise cannot commit the resources.
last question for me before I'm very happy to take any questions from the floor. A little earlier today, we've heard various suggestions that increasingly the ship owners, particularly listed ship owners, particularly ship owners in OECD countries with a close relationship with consumer markets, they are increasingly selling their ships before the end of life because they simply do not wish to be engaged in the recycling process because it is too dangerous for them, it is too risky, and there's clearly a business case. Is that, do you think that is, and I'd like to put it to the three major owners here, do you think that is an increasing trend and a likelihood that few end-of-life ships will be owned by those types of owners? Annette, do you see that as a growing likelihood?
I wouldn't like to answer on behalf of other companies. I think it comes back to the intention. I cannot see Wallenius Wilhelmsen doing that because the intention is to avoid the recycling part of the vessel's life. That I cannot see. But of course, if there are earlier in the vessel's life, commercial reasons and practical market reasons for selling, that could be, but not to avoid our responsibility.
Jessalyn, you obviously at Maersk, you do see the possibility of a genuinely circular process in this. So you see the end of life being a key part of the business cycle.
Absolutely. That is a yes for us because we only sell directly to the yacht owners. And there will be a restrictive clauses for cash buyers in this situation.
Thanks. Any questions before we wrap up? Please. Haresh. Double microphones. Just tap on the end, Haresh, and they should get...
Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
It's not a question, it's my just request to Ship Owners Association that India, I just said that more than 50 yards are Class NK certified yard, but few of the owners are concentrating on the few yards only. So our request is that you have to monitoring the maximum number of yards and can approve for the new yards also. Then it will be, we have invested a more huge amount, each and every yard invested a huge amount. So if everybody can get the benefit for that. That is my request to all ship owners.
Thank you. Any other questions? One down here in the front again. Thanks,
Thank you. My question is, as all the big team is here from the ship owner side, and also Mr. Sharma, and with a live example, he has explained very much. But can we have a thought on ship recycling as a service? Like ban amendment is saying the export, waste export we cannot do, EU SSR, waste regulations of the EU. But we can recycle the ship and send back the waste to the EU. Is there? Or we can do a service, we can do on the profit sharing. As a ship recycling, as a ship recycler, it will be a win-win situation for both. Ship owner as well as...
repatriating the waste back to Europe.
Back to Europe.
Any takers?
Yeah. Just to have opinion.
I mean, this has been our argument for a long time, that we shouldn't split up the market between OECD and non-OECD countries. And it's not my position to say what the Commission would reply, or European policymakers. We're doing a lot of work with European politicians. Their first question or comment when we come up with this argument is, fine, but demand will create eventually supply. It's very simplistic, probably naive argument to make, but this is the mindset of the people that sometimes regulate the industry. That's why my point was that we need to spread these positive stories and make them more engaged in ship recycling to understand better the industry.
Hello. Yeah, actually, I've been attending TradeWinds conference for last 13 years, I think. So 13 years back, the ship owners looked confused, like they were not sure that where to send the vessels. They wanted more HKC yards. So we put a lot of effort and made so many HKC yards now, and most of the yards are empty. And the ship owners today and yesterday, I heard all the ship owners, they still look confused. And they are talking about now EU standards, HKC, Basel Amendment, Basel ban. So it's a very difficult situation for the ship recyclers that we have invested $10 to $15 million to upgrade the facility, and we have done so much work. Only the people that comes to the yard or the facility appreciates. Like we had sororities about 4 months back in the yard, and they were surprised that in Bangladesh so many yards are developed, even the Japanese Ship Owners Association. So we need to engage more, I think, with the European Commission, that they are not coming out of their shell. So they need to come out, and I think EXA and BIMCO and those kind of people can influence them. They need to engage more. In 2015, I was invited at EXA to give a presentation, and I was really surprised that most of the ship owners were so relaxed about the EU regulation, and they were not putting any efforts to change. Whereas ship recyclers, we were pushing that EU regulation shouldn't come. So I think we need a situation where you should say enough is enough. We want to send our vessels to HKC compliant yards, and come, let's do something together. I think that will be the way forward, I guess.
Thank you, Mohammed, for that point. Well made. Any final questions? Going. I can tell everyone's getting hungry and thirsty. Good. At that point, may I just say many thanks to the panelists for this final session. If you'd like to give them a round of applause, please. And thanks to all the panelists and speakers through this day and a half. Been very interesting, very stimulating, quite hard going at times, but very, very interesting. Just one observation from my perspective. So much of this does revolve around the various obvious changes, frankly, not only in shipping, but the whole of the business world. It is increasingly sophisticated. It's increasingly transparent. Industries can no longer hide behind some sort of excuse that they are exceptional. It's an integrated world, and ship recycling is just as important and significant, as impactful as many other areas of business. We saw that in the IMO this summer with the decarbonisation rules. Even just 5 years ago, the world was happy for shipping to be basically given half a pass on needing to meet the Paris decarbonisation rules. Today, the world's moved on and saying, no, sorry, shipping, you're part of the world. You need to move faster. And it's heartening to see the changes in the recycling business, but clearly there are these challenges, particularly around the regulatory detail, which will be resolved. And I guess plenty more scope for more conferences, dare I say it. So if you're not fed up already, I look forward to seeing some of you, all of you, next year, no doubt, when we put this on again. I'd like to thank my colleagues at TradeWinds Events and in our parent group. Obviously, Pranjal, who runs the event, but particularly, Pranjal runs our events, but particularly Alex Tyra at the back there. If you give a wave for Alex. Alex only joined TradeWinds 6 or 8 months ago, and this was his first big conference. So Alex, you did a fantastic job. Thanks for that, and I'm sure there's a lot more to do there. I hope you keep relying on TradeWinds to keep you up to date. We do our best. I know we get things wrong sometimes, and sometimes we get things righter than we know at that moment. But it's a fascinating world of so much change in shipping markets that will be affecting all your businesses in the coming years. So thanks again, and the bus is downstairs at 6:15. Thank you, and thanks to the sponsors as well.